Welcome to this week's episode of Coconut Oil, Stardust, and Dope Vibes. I am your resident fairy godmother, Tamara Angela. So have your tea and honey ready as we settle in for a little chat this week. I want to talk about your energy, protecting your energy, and making yourself available, like how available you make yourself. There's this meme that I posted recently, and you know how memes go. I really love them, or sometimes they're kind of crazy. And this one was talking about making yourself unavailable for people who are genuinely unavailable to you, but they're only available when they want something from you. I mean, old school would kind of call it an opportunist. But these things occur because I think we've had such a breakdown in relationships and how to have relationships. I saw this post from a holistic practitioner the other day, and she was talking about something that I talk about a lot, where it was like, talking about people whose parents didn't have friends. To me, I've always thought it was a little strange and I say this all the time. There's no shade intended. It is simply my opinion and the way that I operate. But I am leery of becoming friends with women whose mothers don't have friends. Simply because to me, those women that I have encountered, like their mothers didn't have a village. Their mothers just didn't have friends. And I'm not talking Miss Popular. I'm talking like your mom simply didn't have, like one or two good friends that she talked to on a regular basis, that you would identify as her friends, like your mom's bestie that was kind of like your auntie, that kind of thing. Your dad didn't have like one or two close homeboys where they would just kind of shoot the shit from time to time and, I don't know, tinker over the barbecue grill. And no, your parents and their cousins don't count. Your cousins, having tons of cousins and things like that, that doesn't count, because they can become your friends. Your cousins and your family members can become your friends, but it's kind of out of a place of obligation because they were already there by proximity. Actual friendships, you have to set an intention to go out and make those friendships. And you're making them from scratch. This is somebody you met at school, a friend from work. Obviously as kids, these would start out in the neighborhood or start out at school. But it's those relationships are void of your parents. Like, your parents typically don't have some association with it where you end up kind of forced in that relationship. So I always look at that and say, when women have mothers who spent more time isolated, or even if their mothers spent time in messy relationships, like they cycled through girlfriends, they couldn't keep girlfriends, that's problematic too. And so I'm reading this post that the holistic healer put up, and I was like, yeah, I kind of commented and was like, yeah, I talk about this often. And I'm reading the comments, and people are like, yeah, like I never really knew how to make friends. I'm an adult. I don't know how to make friends. This concept of friendship is foreign to me. My parents didn't really have friends. And I'm like, this is how we get to a space and time where we lack loyalty. We have internet loyalty. We lack the integrity that's needed to carry on relationships in real life. And so then we get to the point where people are using people or expecting people to be overly available. You know, it's like, as soon as I text you, there's one of my favorite posts. It's like, if I text you at 4:00, I expect you to respond at 3:59. It's so silly, but it's the way that we think unrealistically about a lot of things, because everything is so immediate for us. Everything happens at lightning speed and so quickly. We're just kind of like, oh yeah, like this has to occur very quickly. You know, if I text, you're supposed to respond. You are supposed to respond. But maybe that person was busy. Maybe they're not sitting tethered to their phone. I mean, within a day or so, yeah. But after like a day, obviously, caveats, because this is how people think. Obviously, I'm not talking about something unrealistic where it takes them 2 to 5 days to respond back. I'm talking about like a normal amount, like you guys are texting and having conversation, and then they just don't respond. So there are these unrealistic expectations that we kind of set up for relationships, and it's based on the way that we've formed bonding with our own caregivers from a very young age. Of course, we could get into attachment theory. It's a whole nother session. But here we are in this day and age where it's like, people want something from you. They want you to be available for them to absorb you. But then if you need them to be available, there's trouble. It's not balanced, you know? And I'm thinking, why do we walk into spaces like that? At some point, there was something mutual. At some point. Was that something mutual always consistent? Probably not. But was that something mutual usually, you know, did it occur? Yes, I'll put it that way. So that we don't typically walk into or stay in spaces that don't serve us. We typically don't, because we're human. And there has to be something that we gain from being in a spot. And so we typically don't remain in situations that don't give us something. What we're being given, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a great thing. It's just that we go to these places where we're being given things. And so this meme made me think. It was like, you know, all of us take at some point in time. It's the human condition. Everybody takes. Giving requires much more. It requires something of ourselves. To take, there's not really anything that you have to put out, but to give, you have to be open to, you know, imparting something in someone else. And that requires that we're in touch with ourselves, right? Even if you're being a people-pleasing giver, you know, there's a boundary that's off there where you're too open. A lot of people have trouble giving and receiving based on how they think about themselves, based on ego functions, which we never say over here that the ego is an issue. We need the ego and the super ego. We need all of them balanced. We need all of them to work. The ego does protect us and save us from certain things. And so the ego is not the enemy, but it's the space from which we operate most. And so just having this conversation, it made me start to think, it's like, why is this so unbalanced? Why is this whole idea so lopsided? Why are we constantly in places that don't serve us long term, that don't feed us, that don't nurture us. Like, why are we there consistently asking that space after it hasn't fed us consistently, after it hasn't nurtured us at all? Like, why are we consistently there asking for that space to give us something that it can't give us? And we've had conversation about capacity and things of that nature. But what is it about our human condition now that wants to have a power struggle in a space that has already told you it's not going to yield anything? Why are we there in that sense of the power struggle? So it's kind of a crazy thing to me. It doesn't make any sense. Because ultimately, we're going to feel depleted, rejected. And those are kind of self-fulfilling prophecies, especially if you have not, been versed in how attachment, what your attachment style is. If you haven't really been versed in what your attachment style is, a lot of times you kind of lean towards things that you know. You lean towards things that don't nurture you. You lean towards things that don't care for you because that's all you really know, or a piece of what you feel like you deserve, right? And so we always have to kind of examine that concept. But then how does this work in relationships? And I'm not just talking intimate relationships. I'm talking relationships as a whole, because we really just invite ourselves into these spaces that we see ahead of time aren't going to nurture us. It's like, well, I see that space doesn't yield or nurture anyone else, but I feel like I'm special. And I feel like my light is enough to make this space yield or nurture more. No, that's not how that works. Your light should be enough to let you know, hey, your light should shine on that and say, you know what? I really don't need to be there. This space needs to step up to here or yield more already so I can feel like it's okay to step into that spot. We have to be, I'm really trying to work in, 2023 and upcoming years to really help people to be proactive versus reactive. A lot of what we get when we're talking relationships and foundations of relationships, a lot of it is reactive and building based on the behaviors and the functions of those reactions versus proactively stepping in, intuitively being guided, really looking at things and then saying, this doesn't really work for me. I've seen the pattern over here. This is really where I need to be. Like, actually really paying attention to those patterns that are given to us that we are able to see, and then actually creating our actions based on the intuitiveness, the insightfulness, the discernment that you display. It's like you really look at this and you're like, oh gosh, this isn't it. But something in you drags you in and pulls you in, and then you end up in this space that gives you this self-fulfilling prophecy. And then you're like, oh gosh, like, why did I step into this? Why am I here so long? Some of it is an actual waste of time. Some of it is lessons and detours, all of which can be turned around. But my question is always like, why are you dealing with people who are unavailable? And typically the answer to that is there's a piece of you that is unavailable. You're dealing with emotionally unavailable people. Typically there's a portion of you that you have not explored, a portion of you that you keep highly guarded And so it's easy to recognize someone else who is emotionally available, because it's like, well, if they don't give, like, then I don't have to lean all the way in either, and this space is safe. That can work out for a period of time until somebody decides to authentically be themselves and say, no, I actually really do need more, and I'm going to go for that. Or you guys are going to continue to go through a cycle of things that don't work for either of you. And the dysfunction and the trouble in your relationship is always going to be stemming from the fact that neither one of you is emotionally available. Why do we deal with people who, don't make themselves available? And then, for some circumstances, people end up, there's like one running and one chasing the other person. Well, and then you guys, there is a space where they like to call that the twin flame effect. That's totally dysfunctional. Like, why does anybody subscribe to that? To me, I don't believe in the concept of twin flames. As the way it's been described to us, I feel like certain concepts like that have come from a real space and the definition has gotten warped. The idea of a twin flame, where you have one person that's just kind of running, and then those two people involved in that relationship, they alternate. Sometimes the other person runs and the other person has to chase. Why do we subscribe to that? Like, when you see that happening, why are you choosing to still be there? It doesn't make any sense, and it's certainly not something you should desire to subscribe to. But when we label these things like that, people romanticize it, and it's like, oh yeah, that's really what it is. This is my soulmate. How do I make it better? You don't. There's nothing okay about things being lopsided, and that's one thing, people come to me about. It's like, well, how do I fix this? I mean, that's a good question. How do you ask the other person, hey, I need you to really step up? To me, it's a question of capacity. If the person actually has capacity to step up, they will. They'll step up and step fully into that capacity. They will fill that space. If they don't have the capacity to do it, they're going to either draw from somewhere else to give you what you want and then be depleted again, and then you're going to have to ask again. Or you're going to consistently sit there out of your insight, out of your intuition, and constantly be begging this person to show up. Where does this kind of behavior occur? It occurs in familial relationships. So it occurs within the family unit, between children and parents, between children and caregivers. So this is like the child being raised by their auntie, the child being raised by their grandparent. It occurs in sibling relationships. This also occurs in love relationships, intimate relationships. It occurs across the board. And so there has to be a point at which someone says, hey, this push and pull it's not healthy. This is not what I need. It sends me on an emotional roller coaster, which, exacerbates my anxiety. It's not a space that I want to continue to spin around in. I want off the hamster wheel. Like, we have to be okay with saying all of that and wanting more for ourselves, not pushing against the grain. Our society is like, you have to keep going. You have to keep going. And it says that if you walk out of something, that you're a failure. And I beg to differ. I mean, sometimes people are just quitters and they're just out. But sometimes people are like, you know what? This really isn't for me, and it's okay that I leave. There's power in that. There's power in that. So I want you to decide, how much you're going to make yourself available for people who don't make themselves available to you. Are you going to continue there in those situations? And let's flip the script. Are you the one who doesn't make yourself available to other people? Why is it that they need to continue to make themselves available to you? Have you actually really ever thought about that? Do you show up for your friends as much as you expect them to show up for you? Do you really? And I'm not talking a tit for tat thing. I'm talking, do you understand what it means to your friend? Like, what is their definition of showing up? What is your definition of showing up? And do you guys give that to each other? Is it physical presence? Is it a phone conversation? Is it tapping in? Like, what does that look like? Do you guys have a working definition of that so you can consistently show up for one another? What does that entail? I think there's a space where, once again, we have to, and I've talked about this before, creating your own personal codes. You have to know who you are, to know what it is that you desire and know what it is that you actually need. So then when you're requiring something of someone, you can be very clear about exactly what it is that you need. You can be super clear about it. It's like, I require this in my friendships. I require this in my love relationships. I require this in my family relationships. These are the things that I'm capable of giving. And then you guys figure out where that balance is. These are the things I'm capable of doing. And then those friendships or relationships will actually stretch you to expand, and you'll realize that there are other things that you're actually capable of, and you can add those things to the list. You'll discover that there are things that you're just like, nope, like these are deal breakers, and you'll add those to the list. You're going to constantly be cultivating what this list is, what your personal code is, because you're constantly growing. I feel like when we're just, the heart of everything that I'm always talking about is having an understanding of who you are and being personally attuned to who you are. So as things come up in life, you're more confident using your intuition. You're more confident being spiritually connected. You're more confident forming the relationships that are good for you and being good for other people. Like you're a good person for those other folks, because relationships, there's two spaces. There's you and that other person. So we're always talking about what we receive, but then we have to also talk about what we're able to give, what we have capacity to give. If two people are consistently giving in a relationship, then it doesn't end up being lopsided. You have to have two givers in a relationship. And I firmly believe that, period. You have to have two givers. If you have a giver and a taker, it's always going to be lopsided. And I'm talking taker in a negative way. If you always have a giver and a receiver is very much, passive. And that receiving energy can feel good to the giving energy until the giving energy realizes that they never receive. And then it'll feel lopsided. I think a lot of people are in giving, receiving relationships, not necessarily give or taking relationships. I think a lot of people are in giving, receiving relationships because it's very passive, and you don't realize what all of that looks like until you've been giving and somebody says, hey, like you haven't received, and then you're like, oh shoot, I haven't received, but it's felt so good to give. You haven't realized how lopsided it's been. You have to have two givers in a relationship, because if the other person is always giving and you're always giving, you're always pouring into each other. You're always pouring into each other. So you're always in a space of receiving and then giving again. I want you guys to kind of think about that. Tell me what you think about this week's Sunday Moment. Thank you for joining in. We're always going to have these little spaces of sunshine every week. Something to just kind of awaken you, get you moving, get you thinking, get your heart energy attuned and aligned, get your thought energy attuned and aligned, get your soul back to understanding its power. Thanks for joining me this week. I am your resident fairy godmother, and this is Sunday Moments on Coconut Oil, Stardust, and Dope Vibes.